In this video, I play 2-5 cash at the Aria and buy in for $1,000. We play a ton of crazy hands and end up making some pretty big bluffs. We sit down at a brand new table and get going. In the very first hand of the night, we have King Queen off and there is an early position limp for $5. The cutoff raises to $10. I am on the button and typically I would just fold here, but I give zero respect to a $10 measly raise, so I make it $40. The small blind cold calls and the limper folds, and the cutoff, who originally raised to $10, calls. The flop comes 6, 5, 4, 2 clubs. The pot is about 125 at this point, and the small blind decides to lead for $10. The cutoff makes a call, and this player in the small blind only has a couple $100s to start. For this reason, I decide not to raise here, and I just make the call with my 2 overs and backdoor club draw. The turn is the jack of clubs. This time, the small blind checks, and the cutoff bets $20. The tiny bet from the small blind into a huge pot is obviously not a thing, and the $20 into 155 is definitely not a thing. Time to shut this shit down. I raise to $100. With the king of clubs, I can rep the flush, and we block some of the best jack X like queen jack and king jack. With all of this said, the biggest reason I want to bluff here is just because my opponents are just repping very, very weak. The small blind ends up folding and the cutoff ends up snap calling. The river is a jack of diamonds. Not really that great of a card on the off chance my opponent actually has a jack. With this said, my opponent once again shows me how weak they are by leading into me for $20. With almost $400 in the pot, like I said, this is just not a thing. If they are trying to induce, then congrats, because we only have one option here, and that's to bluff. At this point, my opponent has about $800 behind. I need to continue my story that I have a flush, so I jam all in. All in. My opponent thinks it over for a while, and eventually folds. The bluff gets through, and our aggression pays off. In the next hand, I have the best starting hand in poker, pocket aces. UTG limps $5, under the gun 1 raises to $25. The cutoff calls, the small blind calls, and we 3-bet to 120 from the big blind. The original raiser calls under the gun 1 and the cutoff calls. The cutoff only has about $300 to start this hand. We go 3 ways to a flop that comes jack, 9, 3, 2 diamonds. Being first to act, I start off by checking. The under the gun 1 player bets 225, and the cutoff ends up going all in for less, which is about 180. We have 2 options here, just call or jam. The early position player in this hand has about $700 left behind. If we were heads up, I think I could just call here, but just calling in this situation would almost look stronger than jamming. There's a lot of cards on the turn that we don't really care to see, like some that complete straight draws, as well as a diamond that would really scare off my opponent most likely. For this reason, I go ahead and decide to jam all in. All in. My opponent folds and we see a run out. The turn is the 10 of clubs and the river is the 7 of clubs. I turn my hand over and win versus the short stack that was all in. He ended up having something like king 9 off, so middle pair. Next up, we have ace queen of hearts under the gun and raise to $20. The under the gun 1 player makes a call. The flop comes 10, 8, 5, 2 diamonds. This opponent is only about $100 effective to start this hand. I start off with a check and my opponent checks back. The turn is 8 of clubs. Still no reason to bet here. Our ace high should definitely be good. I check and my opponent checks back. The river is a 9 of clubs. Once again, I check, trying to get to showdown, and this time my opponent bets $10. Not really sure what to make of this, but with the diamond draw missing and this action, I am not going to fold. I make the call. My opponent shows pocket aces. Oh, nice hand. Wasn't expecting that. That was a very slow played pocket aces. He could have definitely got more value there. Next up, we have pocket 9s and raise under the gun 2 to $20. The small blind makes a call, and the big blind 3-bets to $85. This is a small enough 3-bet to make the call and set mine, especially being this deep. We call and the small blind calls but ends up being all in for about $50. The flop comes king 9 7 2 diamonds. We flop middle set. With about 220 in the pot, my opponent bets $75. I just make the call and the turn is the 5 of spades. This time my opponent checks. With 2 flush draws now on board, I decide to bet. I bet 225. My opponent ends up raising to $700. At this point, they only have about $100 more, so I jam all in. My opponent makes a call and the river is the 10 of hearts. This is a pretty safe run out. I turn my hand over and win. We pick up a nearly 2K pot. In the next hand, I get a little bit loose. I have 9-7 of hearts. There's an under the gun limp for $5. This woman is the same one that we bluffed in the first hand of the night, so I want to target her specifically as I don't think she's that strong of a player. I raise to $25. The button makes a call and the big blind ends up going all in for only $89. The UTG limper folds and action comes back to me. I can't really fold for this price, but I do have the button behind me to worry about. For this reason, I decide to re-raise to 180 so that the button folds, and this is what happens. The button folds and we go heads up with the all-in short stack. To a flop that comes 10-8-4, 2 hearts. Well, maybe we did want the button in the hand after all. The turn is a jack of spades. We now have a straight, and the river is the 4 clubs. I show my hand expecting to win, and we do. The short stack you're jammed is obviously not too happy.
That's so crazy.
Little bit of gamble pays off in this one. Next up, the under the gun player raises to $25. The cutoff and the button both call, and I have pocket 8s in the small blind, and I make the call. The flop comes king 4-4, 2 hearts. Action checks all the way around, and the turn is a deuce of hearts. I check once again, and this time the under the gun player bets $75 into about 100. The button and the cutoff both fold. Without a heart here, I think I just fold, but with the heart, I decided to make the call. The river is the 7 of diamonds. I check once again, and this time my opponent checks back. They show king 9 of spades for top pair. Well played by them, controlling the pot with a weak kicker. In the next hand, I have pocket queens, and we are only 6-handed. The under the gun, who's actually the low jack, bets $20. We 3-bet on the hijack to $65, and my opponent makes a call. The flop comes queen 5-3. We flop top set. With the pot being at 130 and being only about $500 effective, I'm going to bet here, but I'm going to bet very small. I bet $40. My opponent makes a call. The turn is the ace of hearts. This is obviously a great turn card as my opponent can definitely have an ace here. When they check, I want to bet and set up a river jam, so I go for a sizing of 125. My opponent makes the call, which is just great. The river changes nothing, it's the 8 of clubs. There's now about 460 in the pot, and my opponent has about 250 left. Instead of having to jam all in and let them call, my opponent decides to lead for 150. This is going to be easier than I thought. Nothing to do here, but put them all in for about $100 more. All in. They make the call, we show, and win. Easy money when you flop sets and your opponent bets into you. We'll take it. Next up, the button limps for $5. I have 8-6 of diamonds in the small blind. Could just call here, but I want to ISO this player as this is the same one from the bluff in the first hand. I raise to $30, the big blind folds, and the button makes a call. The flop comes pretty nice, 9-8-7. We have middle pair with the bottom end of the straight draw. I decide to bet half pot, $30, and my opponent makes a call. The turn is the jack of hearts. Not so great as my opponent could definitely have a 10, and if they do, they now have a straight. I check, and this time they bet $75. This was really weird because my opponent looked like she was going to check out of turn, but of course then decided to bet. I was definitely going to check call anyways, but now after this, I think it's even more of a reason to call as my opponent looks kind of weak. I call and the river is the 4 of diamonds. I check once again, and this time my opponent bets $100. This seems like a value bet, and we definitely just have a bluff catcher at this point. The only thing we really beat here is a missed flush draw on the turn, but being on the smaller side, I decide to pay this off. My opponent shows ace-10 off for the straight. I certainly read too far into my opponent's action on the turn and kind of leveled myself into a call here. This was a mistake, but we'll give some money back from earlier. Next up, the under the gun player raises to $20. I'm in the big blind with 7-6 of diamonds, and I make the call. The flop comes ace-9-5, 2 diamonds. I check, and with $40 in the pot, my opponent bets $20. I think they're just going to be betting range here, and definitely don't have to have an ace. I like my hand as a check raise as we can get my opponent to just fold, as well as turning tons of great cards, like obviously a diamond, or a straight completing card like an 8. A 4 could be decent as well. My opponent makes a call, and the turn is a jack of spades. I continue and bet 150 into about 210. My opponent once again makes a call. The river is the 3 of spades. With about $500 in the pot, my opponent has about a pot size bet left. I could go for it and jam, or I could shut down. At this point, it seems most likely that my opponent has an ace, and I'm out of the business of trying to get people to fold top pair, so I decide to shut down. I check. My opponent checks back, and I announce 7 high.
7 high.
They end up showing jack 10 of diamonds. Well, I am glad the river did not come a diamond. Turns out my opponent did have the one hand that could have possibly folded if we jammed, but definitely couldn't have known that. We will lose this one, but I'm still pretty happy as I think it was a pretty good line. Next up, we have 10-9 of diamonds and raise under the gun to $20. Under the gun 2 3-bets me to $70. I make the call. The flop comes 10-8-6, 2 spades. I check and my opponent checks back. The turn improves our hand. It's a 3 of diamonds. We now have top pair with a flush draw. We could bet here, but I think we could still be behind, so I go ahead and check. This time my opponent bets $85. There could be an argument for raising here, but I just decide to make the call. The river is the 5 of hearts. I check, and this time my opponent announces $200. With the way this is played out, I don't think I can make this fold, but it definitely doesn't feel great.
Is this good? I may have that.
I make the call, and my opponent shows pocket queens. I think they played the hand fine, checking back the flop for pot control, as I can definitely have a set on that flop. With that said, they obviously could have gotten a lot more value from me. Let's see if we can redeem ourselves in the last hand of the night, as I have 10-9 of diamonds again. The hijack limps for $5. I raise to $25 on the cutoff. The button calls, the small blind and the big blind both call. We are going 4 ways to a flop that comes Jack, 8, 3, 2 hearts. Small blind and big blind check and actions onto me. Being open-ended here with the straight draw, I decided to take the aggressive route and bet. I bet $75 into about 100. The button makes a call, the small blind folds, and the big blind decides to jam for about $450. Obviously, we are not getting the correct price to call here, and to make matters worse, there's still action behind us. I make the fold. Let's see how the hand plays out as the button tanks but eventually calls. The turn comes the ace of hearts completing the flush, and the river is the deuce of clubs.
Oh my god.
The big blind ended up having pocket jacks for top set, and the button ended up having 9-7 of hearts for a flush draw and straight draw. As you saw, the big blind's pocket jacks did not hold. The flush got there, and with that, we are done for the night. Time to rack up and cash out. What's up, guys? We were in this session for $1,000 total, cashed out for $1,588, so $1,500 profit and 2.5, pretty good. We were up 2K at one point, so it kind of hurts to not cash for at least that, but it is what it is. As you saw, every hand was going our way in the beginning of the session, then towards the end, didn't go so great. There were some tough hands, like that 10-9 of diamonds. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let's go.